everybody, and welcome back to the channel. Today I will be talking about my April wrap-up. April was a big month for a lot of reasons. I finished out the Dresden Files series, or at least like the books that are published so far, which was probably the biggest part of the month. But I also got to read some of my most anticipated books, and while it was my lowest reading month so far this year in terms of pages, I had a really good time reading the things that I needed to read. And it marked the end of my super commitment to buddy reads, and hopefully the end of the very busy couple of months that I have had in 2022. So I'm hopeful that my reading life will be smoother sailing from here going on further into the year. Again, I have my reading journal here, so we're just going to break things down by star rating. In April, I had 2 3-star books, 2 3.5-star books, 2 4-star books, 1 4.5-star book, and 2 5-star books. I think, did I have 2 3-stars or 3 3-stars? Nope, 2. Yep, so it was 2, 2, 2, 1, 2, which was great. I enjoyed most of what I read, and I will go through them in chronological order. So first, the 2 3-star books I'm just going to lump together because these were the last 2 volumes of the Attack on Titan manga. And I spoke about this in the video that I recently put out about fantasy endings. The Attack on Titan ending is something that I had been anticipating / dreading for a really long time. And essentially what happened is that there was an announcement put out that the anime, which was supposedly in its last season this year, was not going to end with the end of the manga, and that there would be a 1 year approximately wait in order to get the final part of the final season. And I could not do it any longer. I was waiting for the ending of this show for such a long time. I had been so confident that I was finally going to know what happened, and I did not know. And I could not wait. I did not want to get accidentally spoiled. I didn't feel like I could wait another year of dreading what was going to happen. And I think if this ending had been universally loved, I would have waited. If it was something that I knew was going to feel satisfying and fulfilling, then I like that anticipation. I don't usually mind waiting for things. I like the buildup. But this ending is almost universally hated by fans of the series. And so I didn't feel like I could wait another year for something that was going to ultimately disappoint me. So I just went ahead and read the last 2 volumes, and I ended up giving them 3 stars, which is about where my feelings fall for the end of Attack on Titan. I did not hate it as much as some people seem to hate it. I by no means loved it. There were parts of it that I enjoyed, parts of it that I absolutely detested, and parts of it that just left me feeling a little bit confused. It was not the ending that I would have wanted for the series. There are certainly things about it that I could rant about for a really long time, but there were other things that I felt like were fine in terms of an ending. And that's really what it ended up being for me, was just an underwhelming ending to something that is otherwise an exemplary piece of media. I think that I will end up rewatching the first 3 seasons of the anime far more often than I end up watching it all the way through, but it can be difficult to end these things, and while I am not happy with how things went down, it's also not going to plague me for the rest of my days. There's lots of other endings out there that I do absolutely love. So that was the first reading experience for the month, because as soon as that final episode aired, I downloaded those 2 volumes of the manga digitally and read them before I went to bed. So that was that at the beginning of the month. The second book of the month for me was The Price of Spring. So I read the end of the Long Price Quartet, and this was one of my 5-star reads. I loved this book. It is my favorite book in the series. So I think while I gave both this and Autumn War, the 3rd book, 5 stars, I think The Price of Spring edges out an Autumn War for me just by a little bit. I could not stop reading this. All of the books in the Long Price Quartet, I at least find to be very slow moving. And I think that's intentional. And I think part of it is also that I like to savor them. These are not books that I binged, any of them. Even this 4th one, which was the fastest for me, I still took my time reading it. It still took me probably like a week or more to read a book that is much shorter than most fantasy books that I read. And I loved every moment of reading this book. Again, I talked about this series in my video about endings. This is one of my favorite endings to a fantasy series ever. I think that the wrap up of this series elevates the entire series just by virtue of everything that the author put in there. I was surprised. I was shocked. I was heartbroken. I felt hopeful. Like there was a whole range of emotions that were brought out over the course of reading this book, and I do not think I would change a single thing about the way that this series ended. I absolutely loved it. I love this book, and I cannot wait to talk about it in our live stream, which got pushed off a month just because of scheduling difficulties with everybody in the group. But I assure you that we will be talking about this book, and we are all really excited to talk about the conclusion. So, Price of Spring, fantastic, fantastic book. The next book I read was Peace Talks. So this was one of my 4-star books. A solid Dresden book, but definitely one that you can tell was meant to be the lead up to another conclusion. So I believe I have heard that Peace Talks and Battlegrounds were meant to be one book, but then because of page count got split, which I can see. But I definitely felt like parts of Peace Talks were a bit fillery. It did not need to be as long as it was, and it did feel like a build-up. Now, as I just said a couple of minutes ago, I am an anticipation girl. I love that feeling of build-up. I love that delayed gratification. So reading Peace Talks, knowing that I had Battleground available to me immediately, felt really good. Like it felt just like a very slow amping up of tension. So I did like that part. It's just that as a whole, I didn't feel like it did a whole lot. It just felt like an introduction. It felt fine. It was a Dresden novel, so I liked it. There were definitely some quippy one-liners that I enjoyed. I liked seeing the characters together. I definitely was feeling the dread in terms of what was going to come in Battleground. And so I still liked it. It was still a 4-star book. But what it really did was set the stage for Battleground, which I will talk about in a couple of minutes. After Peace Talks, I went and read one of the novellas that had been on my most anticipated reads of 2022 list, and that is Spear by Nicola Griffith. And this one, I believe I gave 4 stars. Yes. So this was a novella, a retelling of Arthurian legend, and I really liked it. I gave it 4 stars because I always find it is so rare for me to get a novella that I feel like gives me everything that I want, because I want a big story. I want a long story. And while I really liked this one, I enjoyed the writing. I thought the writing was quite beautiful, actually. I enjoyed the setting. This is a gender-bent retelling. And I thought that the main character was going to be a female take on King Arthur. She is not. She is another member of King Arthur's knights, and I will not tell you who, because discovering that is part of the fun. If you are super well versed in Arthurian legend, you will probably know almost immediately. I did not know everything about this character's backstory, so it did take me a little bit, and then certain events start to happen, and I was like, oh, okay, this is who this person is going to be. And that was really fun. It was a fun discovery. It was fun to see different narrative elements kind of woven into the Arthurian legend, and it was just a really fun story. If you are looking for a novella to throw onto a monthly TBR, I certainly enjoyed this one. If you are a big fan of Arthurian legend, I thought that this was very satisfying. It made me want to read more of Nicola Griffith's work because I really liked her writing. I really liked her style. I liked the unique elements that she injected into the story. It's just that I wish that this had been a full novel. So I think that I will try to seek out some of her novels and find something else to read by her because I really admired the style. And I'm glad that I had Spear on that list of anticipated books because I'm really glad that I ended up reading it. Up next is the event of the month, and that is Battleground. So the last full-length Dresden novel that has been published. I gave this 5 stars. So I know that Battleground can be somewhat divisive because there were people in Discord who were kind of anxiously awaiting my thoughts and how I felt about Battleground. And I was talking to my friend Andrew over at Andrew's Wizardly Reads, who this is definitely not his favorite book. And he did not enjoy that this is essentially a giant action sequence. It is a huge, large-scale battle. And that is absolutely true. It's the Dresden equivalent of reading the finale of a John Gwynne series. There's just stuff happening all over the place. However, I felt like there were still really poignant character moments, and there were definitely impactful decisions that had to be made in the heat of battle. We did get characters reflecting. Now, this is them reflecting within the context of fighting for their lives, so things that have to move away from events maybe quicker than you would like to see them do so. But I think Jim Butcher did a really good job of communicating that that is the unfair nature of this unstable world that they are living in. And so I really enjoyed it. I obviously can't give any more details about this than to say that it is a battle. We get to see some recurring characters that I'm sure are fan favorites for people. I think that there are some really cool action scenes here. There are some characters who are not getting as much page time in the last couple of books who had really big roles to play in this one, and that made me really happy. And this is definitely an emotional roller coaster, and it's like minute to minute. So I did vlog reading these books, and that video is the second video that will be going up this week. And I kid you not, like there are clips where I will be laughing in one clip and then like totally flabbergasted in the next clip. And I will have recorded them like 2 pages apart. So things happen very quickly, and that feels true to this kind of really intense situation. So I came down on the side of loving it, but I am so sad that I have now caught up with Dresden. I enjoyed this reading journey so much, and I cannot wait. I have heard there's a novella that's going to be released this summer, which I'm really excited about, but I don't know about the next book. I guess I will just wait in sadness with everybody else, but I come down on the side of really enjoying Battleground. It is not my favorite Dresden book, but it is one of the 5-star Dresden books for me, and I, for future videos, will think about how I would actually rank them if I, felt inclined to do so. Following up Battleground, I read, along with a couple of girls on Discord, a romance novel, which definitely flies more on the side of erotica. Like, I read a lot of rom-coms to break up my TBR. I do not read a lot of erotica, but I did read this one with some people on Discord, and it was called The Long Game. It is a sports romance, and it is the sequel to a novel that we had all read, and so we had a great time discussing that, and talking about that on the Discord is definitely way outside what I typically read on the channel. That was one of the 3.5-star books that I read because it was a really good time. It was really fun to talk about it with my friends, but there's not a lot of deeper intercontextual things that are going on. We read this to have fun, and it was definitely fun, and I'm glad that I read it, but I don't know how long I will be thinking about it into the future. The 8th book that I read this month was actually an audiobook that I listened to, and that was Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. So this was my 4.5-star book, and it was a reread for me in preparation for reading the sequel, Fevered Star, I believe it's called, which I have heard some mixed things about, so I'm a little bit nervous about reading the second one because I, once again, really enjoyed this first book. I read this last year and really, really loved it. I will probably give more thoughts on the series as a whole after I read the second book, but this is a fantasy series that is set in the Americas, kind of an amalgamation of different cultures, and we follow, I think it's 3, but it's 3 main characters, but 1/4 point of view comes in intermittently, so technically there are 4, but 3 of them definitely get a lot more page time than the others, and their journeys are all kind of intersecting to this one point, and it's really fast paced. The pacing clips along really quickly. It is an interesting mix of cultures even within the story, because all of these characters come from different places. They have different beliefs. They have different goals in terms of the main story. And their goals are often at odds with one another. So they are actively pursuing things that are contrary to the other characters' beliefs and end goals. So it's very interesting because at least I think that all these characters are really, really fascinating, really fun to follow, and you care about them. And you know that they are on opposite sides of some grand event that is going to happen. And the conclusion of this book is pretty explosive. A lot of things happen in quick sequence, and then you're just left. Like there's a fade to black. So I'm very happy that I have the second book to hop into. I have heard that there's a little bit of a pacing issue at the beginning of the second book, so I will see how I feel about that, but I am really looking forward to reading it, and I hope that I like it. I would be sad to enjoy this one so much and then have the second one kind of fail to meet those initial expectations. And the last book, so this is one that I've been listening to for a couple of months, actually. So this was another audiobook, and this was The Once and Future King by T.H. White. So this is one of the classic works of Arthurian legend. Like if you look at the Arthurian canon, The Once and Future King is definitely one of the classics in that genre. And this is kind of like half reread, half new read, because I have read The Once and Future King, for anybody who doesn't know, is made up of 4 smaller books or novellas. And the first one, The Sword and the Stone, is the story that Disney's The Sword and the Stone is based on. And it follows that very closely. So if you've seen the Disney movie that was made about The Sword and the Stone, that's what the first story is based on. And I had read that alone as a child and really enjoyed it. I picked this up for free. I don't know if it was an Audible sale or if it's always free on Audible, but I really enjoyed the narration. I was like, this is a good chance for me to continue on and listen to the other stories that are in this book. And I would say in terms of my own personal enjoyment, it was a bit of a mixed bag. I really love The Sword and the Stone, and I still liked it as an adult. I think it's charming, it's funny, the narration here did it justice, and I really, really enjoyed it. That book would probably be a 5-star read from me. I think it does a great job of giving us the basic beginnings of King Arthur and pulling the sword from the stone, etc., that very classic part of the tale. The other 3 books, it might actually be 5. I think it is 5. Yes. Because it's The Sword and the Stone, then it is The Witch in the Woods, which follows the Orkney children. So in this story, the children of Morgause are followed along, and we get to see her as the figure in Arthur's life that will bring Mordred into the world, and then we follow her children as well. And so we're following her kids, and we get some insight and some background on the Orkney family, many of whom become a part of King Arthur's court. And in the next story is The Ill-Made Knight, which is one of Lancelot's, one of the names that Lancelot goes by. And it is all about Lancelot. So it's Lancelot and Guinevere's story. There's definitely some of Elaine, who's another major player in Lancelot's story, comes into that. And that's where it definitely gets a bit long in the tooth. So The Ill-Made Knight is the longest of all of the kind of like mini stories that are within The Sword and the Stone. And it's just too long, and it's not really that enjoyable because you get a lot of the like angst from Lancelot and Guinevere. T.H. White kind of has like this comical, irreverent style, and there's a lot of over-the-top sequences and a lot of jokes, and sometimes they come off really well. But in this story that has darker undertones and definitely has a more mature feeling, I did not feel like the styles blended well there, and I definitely felt like we sat with Lancelot's story for far too long. So I did not enjoy that part as much, and that made up the bulk of The Once and Future King. Then the 4th story, I believe, is called A Candle in the Wind. And this is where King Arthur's court starts to kind of devolve and go downhill, and the circumstances that tie into that. And then the very last story is the Book of Merlin, which is a very short one that concludes the entire volume, tells us about the end of King Arthur, what happens to him, how that comes to be, and what that means for the world and what sort of things that he accomplished. So it's a more philosophical, but it's kind of like philosophical tongue-in-cheek philosophy. So it's just a look back at the stories themselves, and I did enjoy that one as well. I liked it all overall, and I gave the entire volume a 3.5 stars. Some parts were more enjoyable than others. Some parts dragged along a little more. I think listening to it on audio was definitely helpful. And I will absolutely still read The Sword and the Stone with my kids because I think that they will find it really funny. And I think that it's a really good introduction into Arthurian myth and legend. So if you are looking for something to kind of dip your toes into that story, I still think The Sword and the Stone is a great choice. And then if you really enjoy it, then you can continue on with the rest of the book if you so desire. But I'm glad that I finally checked the rest of that story off of my Arthurian TBR because it had been far too long that I had not continued with that. Those are all of the books that I read in April. Like I said, I had a great reading month. I really enjoyed a lot of those stories. There are a couple that I have been reading and I am carrying into May. So I have started, I have been continuing to read 20th Century Boys. So I will continue along with those volumes of the manga. And I have started the second book in the Seven Waters trilogy by Juliette Marillier. So that I'm carrying into May. And as you know, I have the third book on my May TBR. So I'm hoping to get through both of those this month if possible. I did have one DNF. And I hesitate to call it a DNF because it's not that I was not enjoying this book. It's not that I don't plan on going back and reading this book. It's just that I was not really feeling it when I started it. And that is Empire of Silence by Christopher Rocchio. This was the channel read along, and I did try to keep up with everybody's comments. I was happy to see everybody chatting about it, and I feel really sad that I did not get to continue and really engage in that conversation. But I was reading a lot of different things. I was very pressed for time at, when this buddy read began. And the story was just not pulling me in. And I was worried that if I continued or tried to force myself through it, that it would take a long time and that I would read nothing else in April. And it would totally send me into a reading slump. So I think I got about 100 pages in and it was fine. I think the writing is really nice. I have high hopes for where the story is going to go. Everybody tells me that it just gets better and better. Like I said, by no means is this I am DNFing this series, I don't want to read it. I think that I'll actually really like it, and I wouldn't be surprised if the series as a whole goes on to be one of my favorites because all of the things that I have heard people say really resonate with me. But I was just not feeling reading it in April, and I have so many things that I am super excited to read in May and June that it wouldn't surprise me if it took until the end of the summer or the beginning of the fall for me to get back to it. And then I'll just kind of start over from scratch and go from there. So still looking forward to reading that series, but it will unfortunately not be anytime soon. And that's really it. I don't feel like I watched a lot of TV in April. April, like I said, was just really busy. I did go see The Bad Guys with my kids. So we took a trip into St. John's and stayed there for the weekend, which the kids are always happy about because they love going and staying in a hotel and it feels very fancy. But we saw The Bad Guys movie. My son loves those books. We have read them a million times. He reads them himself. He always has them with him, so he carries them back and forth to school in his book bag. And so it was really fun because it was a movie that he really wanted to see, and his sister likes them as well, and she really wanted to see. But it was also one of their first experiences seeing a movie based on a book, and the expectations that you have and how you liked it and how it played out. My daughter, who is not as attached to the book series, actually ended up liking the movie more. My son, who is really attached to the book series, ended up liking the books more, but still enjoyed the movie. So that was a really fun family time, and it was a great weekend on top of that. But it's really all I have to report in terms of TV watching because I didn't do a whole lot of it last month. And that's it. That is my April. Like I said, I'm really looking forward to May. I would love to know what all of you guys read in April. What were your favorite books of the month? Oh, I didn't say my favorite book of the month. I think it's still Battleground. Maybe not. Maybe Price of Spring. Oh, really hard. I don't want to pick. I'm going to say both of them. I really loved both of them. And I will see you all with another video soon. Bye.